Hey, Liz. Now we'll see
Hello,
if
Rabbi.
others think I'm going to be here. I did not do a good job of communicating about today.
Oh, that's, you know, but we know that you were going to
Par
be here.
for the course. It's par for the
I
course.
wasn't going to say that.
It's a given.
Well,
So
let
while
me
we're
see
doing
if
that,
I
I'm
can.
just going to text them. While we're on, I'm just going to text some people who are asking me if about other.
Yes,
Okay.
I sent a text to Lois, but she never looks at her phone. So maybe I'll just call her
Okay.
because I know she's around.
Okay. Oh, there's somebody coming on. There
Lois.
she is.
Hi.
Hi, I was just texting you again.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Okay.
All right. Um, Yesterday I was at a wedding, and Rabbi First was there, so I used it as an opportunity to talk over some things. Hey, hey, Estelle, and so it's just
Hi, Rabbi.
hi. There's this happens often when you're talking. It happens often to me when I'm talking with scholars that are on a completely another level. It's like if somebody would say, like, what do you mean when you say that a scholar's on a different level? This is not just true with Torah. This is true with scholarship in general. But like I remember when you watch the nominating hearings of these Supreme Court justices. So I don't remember every nominating hearing, but I remember specifically with Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett that there were there were other, like attorneys and professors who were trying to explain how they're on a completely another level of knowledge, and that they're I remember specifically about Roberts and her. I mean, there's this guy. I think his name is Feldman. He's a professor at Harvard,
Noah.
and Noah Feldman. So Noah Feldman was saying about Amy Coney Barrett. He was saying, like, there were a bunch of legal thinkers that were coming up around the same time, but when there was a problem in the group, you went to her. Like she was head and shoulders above the rest of them. Like, and I remember them saying it about Roberts also, that he's just like completely. And to me, I don't have an experience like that with law, but I do have this experience, with Torah knowledge, that what it means when you're, and it doesn't, because you would think it means just they're a genius, but it's not just about being a genius. There's a kind of gestalt that they're that they have a integrated kind of knowledge at a level that, so it's like they know everything better. It's not like they know one thing better. They know like everything better. Because I mean, obviously there's some things they don't know, but for the most part, they just, like any topic you speak to them, you just experience that they're seeing it at a different plane, and so I often have this when I'm talking to people like that I've researched something, and then I've come to what seems to me my best understanding, and then I'll have even a few weeks to integrate it, and I feel like I've gotten to the limit of where I could go, and then I'll ask one of these people at this next level, and they just so simply took it to another place. But it's the experience of seeing them do it that it's just like, it's refreshing, but it's a little humiliating, because you were just like up at this edge and couldn't see beyond the edge, and they're just so effortlessly, it appears, they're so effortlessly at this next place. And so I had one of those with Rabbi First. I had it with Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik a couple of weeks ago, where you're there. It's not just like you're looking for a solution. Is it A or B? And then they go B. No, it's how they see the whole thing. And one of the things was my Shauli, my son who lives in Israel. So he has a brother-in-law who he and his brother-in-law have essentially been intertwined in learning since they met. And this has been going on for years. His brother-in-law runs a kollel, Shauli's in the kollel, and Shauli's like sort of like his assistant. They're always talking and learning together. They're always talking. So when I'm there, I'm always talking and learning with the both of them. So his brother-in-law had brought up this issue of whether or not the war in Gaza is what we would call milchemes mitzvah. Is it a war in the class of a mitzvah war? So the Rambam talks about some of the we've talked about it before. The Rambam talks about some of the distinctions between what would be called a mitzvah war and what would be called just a regular war, or it's called milchemes reshus, like a permission war. Like, so let's say a king decides he's going to battle with another country because they're not paying their tribute, like in the biblical battles between Jewish kings and other nations. That would be called milchemet reshus. That's a king deciding that strategically, for political and strategic reasons, he needs to go to war. Then there's war that's a kind of like a mitzvah. And that would be like when God said to go to war against the 7 nations, or against the Midianites, or against Amalek. But it also seems like a war of defense of the Jewish people, or a war of defense of Israel, would also fall into that category. It's less clear. And also, when does it arise to that level? But one of the things that kicks in if it's considered a mitzvah war is that everyone is supposed to go to war. Even a kala from the chuppah, it says, is supposed to go to war if she has to. Everybody's supposed to go to war, which would mean the yeshiva students should be fighting in this war. So my son's brother-in-law, Rabbi Yitzi Newman, so he was arguing that this must not be called a milchemes mitzvah, because nobody's telling the yeshiva boys that they have to go to war. I mean, nobody being the heads of the yeshiva. So he concluded that this must not be called a milchemes mitzvah, and then he came to all sorts of other conclusions based on it. And my argument to him was, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And this seems to have the criteria, so it must be a milchemes mitzvah. I don't know why they're not doing, so we were having this discussion back and forth. What makes it a milchemes mitzvah? I talked to Mordechai Becher about it. This was during my winter vacation. I think we were in Wisconsin Dells, I remember. So I was talking to Mordechai Becher, and he says he thinks it is a Milchemes Mitzvah. Anyways, so there was a back and forth about it. So, so that was one of the conversations where I was talking to Rabbi First, and he just looked at me and he goes, "This is a Milchemes Mitzvah," and he even said the words, "A kala should go from her chuppah." So I said, "Well, then how come the yeshiva bachrim don't have to go fight?" And he said, "Because right now the army doesn't want the yeshiva bachrim. It just doesn't want them." So then I said, "Well, then shouldn't they be in some kind of supporting role?" So he said, he seemed to say, if there would be a call and people would say, we have a shortage of people in supporting roles, then they would be obliged to go. If the army gave a call and said, we're missing soldiers and we need soldiers, they would be obliged to go. But that is sort of the ease with which he said, clearly they're not calling for it. The army, politically, the politicians are calling for the yeshiva students to be in the army, but the army isn't arguing for it. But it sounded like, according to him, that if the army would say, we need soldiers, we need the yeshiva students because we have a lack of soldiers, that they would be obligated to go, halachically obligated to go. So what would happen then? Anyway, so that was one example. I was also asking, I have this thing about, there's this issue about praising Gentiles, issue of, there are a lot of people, yeah.
As far as my understanding and what I've learned from listening to Israel News, the army has said that they're short and they need them to come.
I will tell you that you have to sort of parse it, because now again, I don't know the situation right now, but several years ago, the Supreme Court, I'm going to say this is about 8 or 10 years ago, the Supreme Court declared that the arrangement that Ben Gurion had with the Haredi population in Israel is null and void. It's not a binding, it's not binding, it's not law. There was an original kind of arrangement, a kind of status quo arrangement that yeshiva students wouldn't serve in the army. And that was an agreement between Ben Gurion and certain religious leaders in Israel at the time. So the Supreme Court declared that that is not law and it's not binding. And the Knesset passed it was when Lapid first got into the government. I believe the Knesset passed a resolution that the yeshiva students have to go to the army. And so there were all these arrangements between the army and the religious community that now no longer existed. For instance, there was an official army status called Ben Yeshiva, which meant yeshiva student, and you'd get a deferral that no longer existed. I'm going to say this is about 8-10 years ago. So the army basically said, we don't care what the Supreme Court said, and we don't care what the Israeli Knesset said. We're not taking in 60,000 Haredim. We're not set up for it. We don't have a way of doing it. It will be disruptive. So the army, and I know this for a fact because my son Shauli was involved in this situation, that the army just started giving deferrals anyways. They just didn't call him yeshiva student. Like with Shauli, they just said, you aged out. He actually has a letter from the army the letter from the army says, with regard to Shaul Karsh, draft number ... he applied for a status of Ben Yeshiva. That status no longer exists. It is our assessment that he is too old to join. He was like 25 at the time. He is too old to join the army, and they just, because the army itself did not want this influx. Now, maybe things have changed. I don't think so, but maybe things have changed. So you have to read between the lines to see what does the army want and what does the Knesset want. So, but it sounded like from Rabbi First that if the army said, we need new conscripts now, and we need the yeshiva students to be those new conscripts, it seemed like, according to him, they would have to do it because this is a Mechemes mitzvah. And Rabbi First is a Haredi rabbi. He's not just a rabbi, he's considered one of the main halachic authorities in America. And it was just like, it was a no-brainer to him. It was an absolute no-brainer. He said, this is a Mechemes mitzvah. Yeah, and anyway, so that was just one of those moments.
Rabbi,
Was,
all yeshiva students study all day long, and that's all they're doing. I mean, it's only there are a lot of, I can say, mediocre students who perhaps don't study continuously. They might for 2 or 3 years. So, there's no reason.
First of all, there are,
they can't, because
within the
you're
sociological,
not studying 24/7.
right? Do you want to be the one?
So
Who's going to make the decision? That's the thing. Who's going to be the one to look at the yeshiva boy and say, you get to stay and learn?
Well,
and
they themselves should look at themselves and say, okay, look, I'm not the type of person who can sit and study all day long.
Right.
I don't, and therefore they should take it upon themselves also.
Right. First of all,
try to get out of it.
I agree. First of all, when Americans are looking at this subject, there is a mistake that a lot of us make, which is we think all religious Israelis are in the same sort of category when it comes to
I know they're not. I know
right.
that
No, there's it's only the Haredi. It's only the Haredi community where the yeshiva boys don't.
Haredi, they're not all the same.
Right. So now they have been talking about it within Israeli culture and within Haredi culture. There are different, there are some aspects of Haredi. For instance, Ponevezh Yeshiva, which is a Haredi yeshiva, it's one of the most influential Haredi yeshivas in Israel. It's in Bnei Brak, and its leadership usually are considered amongst the leaders of the Haredi world. Their heads of yeshiva were noted for advising many parents to send their sons to the army. Now, these were not what these were people. These were students that would not do well in a continued full day learning because, like you were describing, they're not cut out for it, and it wasn't healthy for them to continue to pretend to be studying in a place when they're not getting benefit. So they started to advise their students, those students, to go to the army. The numbers are, I've seen different numbers, but now the numbers I'm seeing are a few thousand Haredim a year, and the number seems to be increasing, are going into the army, and they've started to have Haredi units. And that's what the army wanted. The army
Yes.
wanted a gradual,
Yes.
a kind of gradual increase, because if you just suddenly had 60,000 people jumping in, the cultural shock, all to the army and to the people and to everybody, they were concerned it would be too much. Anyways, it's a very hot button topic. It's been a hot button topic for many decades, and it will continue to be one.
Yeah, but I think the
come up
army
in-
says that, it's not going to take all students. They will process them and see if they are suitable or not suitable. And
right.
put them
So
in
then you
if
have
they are
to,
suitable. So they're not going to have suddenly 60,000 people,
Right.
or however many.
right. But part of the question, again, this is just how politics works. Part of the question is who gets to decide. Like, does the army decide, or do the yeshiva decide? Like, who gets to decide who's
Let's hope
considered?
that they take the, they listen to what the army want, because that's who they need to listen to.
Right. So it sounds like, according to Rabbi
political
First,
side. Yeah.
it sounds like that's what should be happening right now, because it's a milchemes mitzvah. This qualifies. And anyways, that was just one of the things. Just refreshing to hear somebody's functioning on a different level. Okay. Also, we were talking about suffering of animals and in the Rambam, and I mentioned that in Daf Yomi we were right at that same place, and so our Daf Yomi's been studying that subject, the mitzvah to help relieve a burden from an animal that's overburdened, or to help unload and load an animal for somebody who seems to be having trouble. And so that discussion is happening in Daf Yomi, which is cool when you have a convergence like that. And one of the discussions in the Gemara is about the general notion of what we call tsar balei chaim, suffering to animals, whether it's biblical or rabbinic. And we talked about these mitzvahs as a possible source for, if it is biblical, a possible biblical source for that mitzvah. Again, it wouldn't be that it's just forbidden to cause suffering, but there's also a mitzvah to relieve the suffering of animals. One of the questions that came up in our class is, would it be a mitzvah to contribute to the Humane Society or another organization that's devoted to relieving the suffering of animals in a different place? Would that actually be a mitzvah? In light of this, or is it just when you come across a situation, an actual situation, you have a mitzvah to be engaged? So we had that. Did we get to returning lost objects? I don't think we did. That's also the discussion from Daf Yomi. I don't even know if we did this. Let's do this one, and if we did it, we'll do it again. That is that he commanded us to raise up the load upon an animal or a person when he is alone, after someone besides us has put it down. For just as we've been commanded to unload it, so too we've been commanded to raise it up. So you're walking along a way, and you happen to notice that a person is trying to pack his donkey. So this is not the original packing of the donkey. Something's gone wrong, and the guys had to take the load off and put it down. And now he's putting it back up. So you actually have a command here to help him load the animal. There is a question here about whether you have a command to load it if the owner himself was the one who put it down. In other words, did the owner create this problem? And he's putting it back up or not? So there are some details in the discussion of this in the Talmud. But we'll just say in general, if you come across somebody who is loading his animal, there's a mitzvah to help him load his animal. But the Rambam also points out that it's also helping a person load himself. So if he has a backpack or he's carrying some other stuff, that the mitzvah would also be to help him load his pack. Again, does this mean that there's an indication in the struggle that he can't do it on his own? Again, if I come across somebody on the way and he's not able to put his pack on his own, then he's in sort of trouble. When you're on these roads, they're not always safe, and so there may be more to the context than simply helping somebody. But it does leave you wonder if, let's say you're driving and you see somebody pulled over and they're trying to fix something with their car, or maybe something fell off the back and they're trying to put it back on. So there's reason to sort of explore this area to see that may be a specific fulfillment of this mitzvah of helping them in that situation. Obviously, we're talking about where you are certain it's safe. You're not putting yourself at risk by doing it. And that is his saying, you shall surely raise it up with him. The language of the Mechilta, again, halachic midrash. This is the Mechilta of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. You shall surely raise it up with him, that is loading. The regulation of this commandment are been explained in the second chapter of Bava Metzia. There it is explained that is a commandment from the Torah to load. It is also a commandment from the Torah to unload. So if the animal is overburdened, then it's a mitzvah to unload it. And again, it's a mitzvah to help the owner load his animal as well. Okay, and now that he commanded us to return a lost object to its owners. That is, his may be exalted, saying, you shall surely return it to your brother. And in the explanation, they said, returning a lost object is a positive commandment. They also said about a lost object, we have found to learn that one transgresses a positive and a negative commandment, and behold, we will explain the negative commandment in its place. So there's a positive commandment of returning the object. There's a negative commandment, which is to ignore the lost object and thus not return it. And he said he'll explain the negative commandment when we get to it, but this is the positive commandment. The laws of this commandment have already been explained in the second chapter of Bava Metzia. So this actually, there are certain mitzvahs that we take for granted nowadays as being law that even non-Jewish constituencies would have a similar kind of law. Nowadays, we take it for granted that if you find a lost object and you have the ability to return it, then you need to return it to its original owner. Apparently, for much of history, this was not the law. In many locales, the law was that if somebody found a lost object, it was meant to go to the authorities or to the realm, but it wasn't returned to its original owner. I've done very cursory, research about this. I have not done extensive research, so I don't know really about the development of this and how it developed to be that in most places it's understood that you return lost objects to their owner and that it's the right thing to do. But apparently that wasn't the case for much of history. And so this would be a departure. This would have been an innovation, we'll call it, of the Torah, that when you find a lost object, you're supposed to return it. Also, in the language of the Torah, it's as he pointed out, it's the negative commandment, but in the language of the Torah, it says you are not allowed to hide yourself from it or ignore it. So, for instance, if you saw a goat that belonged to somebody else just sort of wandering in a place it's not supposed to be, it would be incumbent upon you to return that goat to the person who it belongs to. And if you don't know who that is, to find out who it is. And if that's not working for you, you would go to a kind of public lost and found area, and you'd make sure that there were announcements that you found this goat, and then you'd return it to the person. The person would demonstrate to you that they are in fact the owner. They would describe characteristics of it that only the owner would know, and then you would return it to that person. Same thing with a wallet or any clothing, any kind of article that that you assume belongs to somebody else, and that they would care about it, you're supposed to return it. There are articles, as the Talmud points out, the Mishnah points out, there are some articles that you don't have to seek out the owner, and examples of that would be something that you're certain the person would have given up on. There's no way they thought they're ever getting it back. That works through something called yush, where a person almost abandons hope of ever getting it back, and that actually releases their ownership of the object. And once they've done that, you're allowed to keep it. So, one extreme example of this would be salvaging a treasure, a deep sea treasure. So this is, we're talking about the Torah's law, not if there is local law by government, we would have to follow the local law of the government in a lot of these situations, because Dina de Machusa Dina, the law of the land is the law. But if you were just looking at Torah law, and let's say you were somebody who salvaged ancient wrecks, and you scuba dived, and then you found a hoard of gold bullion. So according to the Torah, you'd be able to keep it, not just because it's ancient. Even if it was modern, according to the Torah, you'd be able to keep it, because the assumption is once that boat sunk, the person despairs They abandon hope of ever getting it back, and they actually lose their ownership of that article, which brings up a sort of interesting exploration of the relationship between us and objects. That we have a relationship with objects, a psychological bond, an emotional connection, and our relationship with objects is deep and to the point where some might say when something's taken from them that they may characterize it as they've been violated. Their person has been violated somehow. So it's a very deep bond. And the exploration of that bond, it's sort of an interesting thing to do, to go back and look at the Torah. In what ways does the Torah talk about the relationship between man and objects? You could say even the tree of the garden, tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you could say that is part of a meditation on the relationship between people and objects. Certainly when Chava names her first son, Cain, she says, I acquired a son with God. There seems to be an object-person relationship between Chava and Cain. The relationship between man and the land, and ownership of land. But as the Torah progresses, it's just sort of interesting to look at the various stories, the various teachings in the Torah, and see how they shed light on this relationship between people and objects. Theft was considered the signature crime of the people in the generation of the flood. It says the world was full of Hamas, and besides being Hamas, the commentary suggests that this is referring specifically to theft, and theft is a kind of signature crime indicative of a breakdown in values of society. So why would that be? Sodom, there's a way of looking at Sodom, crimes to have to do with their relationship to objects and to money, to material things. And it just goes all the way through. It's just sort of an interesting subject, because I don't think we always consider how interesting it is that we have this bond with objects, and how it matters in many of our lives, especially in the consumer society that we live in. It's just funny to me when I visit people now, there's hardly a home I go to that doesn't have an Amazon package waiting outside before I go in. It's just how much, but anyways, our relationship to objects. So this thing of returning lost objects certainly is very much about that, and honoring that, the relationship between people and their objects. Okay, I look forward to learning with you guys. Thank you for your patience about last week. And I missed learning with you guys. I'm very grateful that I get to do it. And I look forward to doing it again tomorrow. Be well.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Same here.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Bye-bye.